Rajin Prasad.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to take a call on this bill, the third reading of this bill. And in doing that, I do agree with the Minister that there is every reason for him to express satisfaction, that he happens to be the Minister who has heard everybody else who's been suffering through this issue and brought a solution to this Parliament. And that solution has currency and has been developed into this bill, and it has gone through all its stages. So yes, it is a time to acknowledge that that advocacy has been successful, and everybody in this House has done that. However, it is not a time for recrimination of the type that we've just heard. Because I do know, as a person involved intimately in this issue, right throughout the period it was being developed through my own family and through many of my friends, that there were solutions that were being designed as people got more familiar with the problem. The weathertightness solution, the authority that was set up, was a solution that was probably best practice at the time. Who had this experience? So to say that the last government did nothing is looking for recrimination for no good reason. And I think one must push back on that. Public opinion was at a particular place, the science was at a particular place, and we've understood more about that. So thank you, Minister Williamson, for acknowledging that, and I do acknowledge your contribution to this. But, Mr. Speaker, it is also, I will talk about the specific provisions of this bill, and what I'm about to say leads into that. But it is also time to reflect on the kind of failure that occurred that resulted in this problem. And the Minister has described this as multiple failures, truly systemic. Yes, it was so, but it was also a failure of the private sector in many, many ways. It was allowed to run amok in the development industry, devoid of the standards one expects for good buildings to be had. And then when it was brought together by untreated timber and things like that, you know, Mr. Speaker, the kind of unethical practices that took place then that we realized afterwards is really what we are trying to address as well. The designs were faulty, and there was no good architect that would say the designs, but they were cheap, which is why they were adopted. There's no reason for the building materials to be abused in the way that they were. The workmanship that created this problem was to see this, Mr. Speaker, I was incredulous, and I do know something about building, having built houses myself. And the normal guarantees that would be given were not there. And indeed, the assurances that one gets when around inspection. Those who inspected these buildings were also from the private sector, many of them contracted by local authorities. So here we are. This is a massive bailout of a failure of the private sector. I do want to acknowledge that as well. We trusted that sector to fix it, and it didn't. And, Mr. Speaker, there are so many examples. I've seen top plates of curved buildings, top plates being made out of particle board, and then plastered over, and then the railings drilled through it and simply sealed up. It became a leaky building. That was a failure of design. You know, these buildings could have been made with the same materials, with good workmanship and good design and good inspection, and this would not have happened, but indeed they did. So the leaky building is Minister's right, a systemic failure. And, Mr. Speaker, the damage that leaky building did to many individuals and families has been just incredible. And I believe entirely what the Minister says, that he has looked into the eyes of his families and has seen the enormous damage that has been done. I've looked into the eyes of my own children and seen the enormous damage being done to them. And luckily they had a parent who could sign a cheque to fix it up. However, Mr. Speaker, the provisions of this bill do not take that away, and we ought to acknowledge that, because I do know that some elderly people who sold the last pieces of property they had, bought in an apartment block, and able to manage their expenses, became leaky, and they had nowhere to go, and they are still there, and this bill does not assist them. So the bill is an attempt to address the problem, and it's a good attempt insofar as it goes, but it does leave enormous problems still unaddressed. And that's not a criticism of you, Minister. I appreciate them as limitations. However, it is a problem for this Parliament. It is still a problem for government. Mr. Speaker, there is something difficult about understanding that you only qualify if your building is 10 years old. If it's 10 years and 1 month old, you don't qualify. And yet you're in exactly the same situation as the person whose building is 9 years and 11 months old. Exactly the same situation. The personal hurt to you, the impossibility of fixing it, the assistance you get from elsewhere is exactly the same. And yet that family will not be assisted, and there are many in that particular area. So, Mr. Williamson, the problem hasn't gone away for that sizable part of our population. What is to happen to them? Who is to stand us alongside them? And I still think solutions need to be developed for this particular group. Perhaps the 20-25-50 is a generous offer for those who qualify, and it could have been stretched a little bit further, but I'm sure the designers and select committee did look at that. But it does create a problem, and the provisions of this bill has not addressed that particular one. There are also others, Mr. Speaker, who do not qualify, and I've only talked about those in a particular whose buildings are more than 10 years old. Those who have already commenced repairs. Those who were approved by private certifiers. And that's pretty hard, because a private certifier was contracted by somebody to go and do a professional job. They did not do that. And simply because of that fact, that family, that individual, that elderly person, that elderly couple in retirement now don't qualify for this assistance. So there is something unfair about these solutions themselves as well. So the bill is, Mr. Speaker, like the proverbial carrot egg. It's good in parts, it's good as far as it goes, and it still is a credit to the designers to having brought it this far. But it leaves a problem unanswered, and that problem at some point will have to be answered by government, or local authorities. There are one or two other points I wanted to make, Mr. Speaker. I was very happy in the committee stages of this bill to get the Minister's assurance about the assessment process, that at the moment the building is assessed, an agreement reached, a sum as to who's going to pay how much, and then the building is opened up. And when opened up, as sure as night follows day, that assessment will be inaccurate. And I was really, really worried, because I've seen this with my own eyes, as to how amount of damage is done. The Minister assures me, and it's on the record of Parliament, if ever lawyers ever need to go back to this, that now those owners can go back to the assessor, have that reassessed again after the cladding's been taken off, and another arrangement made about how much money is to be made available. So I thank the Minister for clarifying that, and I was quite concerned that that would be a problem. I still have, and I disagree with the Minister on this one, that there is still something inherently unfair about this bill, and this is those who have purchased at bargain basement prices leaky buildings and sizable discounts. So those who originally owned the building have missed out. They just got out of it by somebody purchasing that, and now most of them are not private young couples. These are developers, these are speculators. They now have the ability to receive state funding up to half the cost of repair to get that repaired, and then to harvest the capital gains that this would give them. Enormous gains as well. I would rather that money was utilized for those cases, the ones I talked about, who really have no other means of fixing this problem up. So the Minister has not been convincing on this particular one, but it is a problem, and I hope at least priority will be given to those who are genuine homeowners who still own and live in their home.
Sorry to interrupt the
Thank you.
honourable member.
Thank you, Minister.
Chris Hawkins.